We begin the day with Trump's tariff threats and the political consequences. Recently, when U.S. President Donald Trump imposed and then suspended tariffs on all Canadian products, it got many there thinking, with friends like that, who needs enemies? Well, Canada's leaders are apparently rethinking their ties to the United States. They're turning to another partner, also targeted by Trump's tariffs, an ally on the other side of the Atlantic, the European Union.
The U.S. is finally learning its lesson the hard way. For years, Canada has been its most reliable trade partner, its go-to supplier for everything from oil to agricultural goods. But in a move that has left Washington in absolute disbelief, Canada has cut the U.S. out of the equation and signed a massive trade deal with the European Union with zero tariffs, long-term contracts, and billions in economic benefits. This agreement has replaced America's role in Europe's market, and just when you thought it couldn't get more intense, the fallout is already being felt across the White House. And wait till you get to the end of this jaw-dropping development.
You know, this whole thing in the last 2 days about fentanyl and the millions of people crossing the border, including from Canada. If you sit there and you try to respond to each of the complete misinformation or the lie or the inaccuracy, however you want to describe it, you'll drive yourself crazy. But also, that's not a solution, because you're not going to point out to him that he's wrong. And the fact that he goes and speaks at Davos, and there you would think there would be some cognitive dissonance, but again, that doesn't have an impact. It's yes, there's a combination here. He really likes tariffs, and he thinks they're a solution to many things, including generating additional income for the government.
Donald Trump, the man who prided himself on making America win in global trade, is reportedly in a panic over this shocking shift. His aggressive tariff policies, once seen as a power move to protect American industry, have backfired spectacularly, pushing Canada straight into the arms of the EU. With Canada now redirecting its exports to Europe, U.S. industries are left scrambling, facing rising costs, supply shortages, and an economic mess that could take years to fix. The question is, did Trump just make one of the biggest miscalculations of his political career? And more importantly, is it too late to fix the damage?
Canada's largest daily newspaper, the Toronto Star, has posed a question that not too long ago would have seemed fanciful. It ran with the headline, "Donald Trump drives a wedge between Canada and the U.S. with a trade war. Could we join the EU?" And it's not only the Toronto Star. The Economist has been pondering why Canada should join the EU. Europe needs space and resources. Canada needs people. Let's deal. Well, leading voices in the European Union have also been getting behind it. European Parliament member Guy Verhofstadt posting on X, "We in Europe remember that Canadians died to liberate our continent. In the face of Trump's madness, the EU stands with Canada now. There is no reason why EU membership should be off the table."
The signs were there for years, but Washington never took them seriously. Canada had warned that Trump's aggressive trade policies were pushing them to find new partners, yet the U.S. kept tightening the screws. The breaking point came when Trump slapped a 25% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum, triggering an economic standoff. At first, the U.S. assumed Canada would simply absorb the losses and continue business as usual. After all, where else would Canada turn? But that's where Washington got it wrong. Canada wasn't just looking for a temporary fix, it was looking for a way out. Washington never saw it coming, and it gets even crazier.
The EU, is it possible for Canada to become the 28th member of the European Union? And is that what Europe wants?
So it's not impossible, has been the response that I've had from EU officials after asking that question. It might have seemed a little bit sort of glib that I asked him whether it would be better for Canada to be the 28th EU member or the 51st state of the United States. But it really belies a pretty important discussion, which is, where does Canada see itself in its place in the world related to the United States and related to the European Union? It was very clear from Trudeau's arrival here in Brussels that they feel very warmly.
U.S. leaders assumed that Canada would always be there, locked into economic dependence with no real alternative but to trade with America. But while the U.S. was busy slapping tariffs, renegotiating deals on America's terms and acting as if Canada had no other choice, something was happening behind the scenes. Canada was watching, learning, and most importantly, planning its exit strategy. Now that strategy has paid off in a way that has left the U.S. in Canada has officially replaced America in the European Union supply chain, and the effects are already rippling across multiple industries.
The Prime Minister meeting with European allies in Brussels as they all face growing threats from Donald Trump.
The story between the European Union and Canada, it is the story of good allies and it is the story of trusted friends. And trust is very much needed in an unpredictable world.
Trudeau's talks included the mutual benefits of trade.
Trade agreements are clearly better than trade tariffs.
Tell us more about this story. What do we know?
Yeah, it's hard to say how much those tariffs will eventually be. Canada is said to be just starting public consultations on these tariffs now, and there's strong pressure on Prime Minister Trudeau to really match those tariffs that has been introduced by the Biden administration of upwards of 100%. The EU, of course, has also imposed tariffs of up to 48%. There is new research that has came out from an American think tank saying that China has provided over $200 billion in support to its domestic EV sector over the past 15 years. But to be fair, though, those support per vehicle has come down drastically over the years to just under $5,000 per vehicle last year.
It wasn't just about steel and aluminum. While the Trump administration thought these tariffs were a smart way to bring back American manufacturing, they forgot one key detail. America's industries rely on trade partners who trust them. The moment that trust was broken, Canada started exploring its options. It reached out to European leaders, offering them a better, more reliable trade deal, one that didn't involve unpredictable tariff threats or political game. The EU, dealing with its own supply chain problems and looking to reduce dependence on China and Russia, saw a golden opportunity. A trade partnership with Canada meant stable pricing, zero tariffs, and a secure long-term supply of key resources.
The disagreement between provinces goes even deeper. Last night, Premier Ford said he is convinced Canada will not escape U.S. tariffs. However, François Legault cited his meeting with Trump last week in Paris.
And he told me very clearly that we can avoid those tariffs if we do what needs to be done with the borders.
Which is the focus of a new announcement from Alberta Premier Danielle Smith today, a team of specially trained Alberta sheriffs that will patrol the border, more than 50 officers, K-9 teams, and cold weather surveillance drones to stop illegal cross-border activity.
The deal wasn't just about oil, steel, or minerals. It extended to agriculture, advanced technology, and even pharmaceuticals. Canadian companies that once sold the bulk of their goods to the U.S. are now shifting their focus entirely to Europe. The demand is enormous, and with no trade barriers, Canada now has a stronger foothold in the European market than the U.S. ever did. One of the most devastating blows for America comes in the agriculture sector.
Similar worries for Colin Penner. He grows grains bound for the U.S. Usually this time of year, he's focusing on his equipment. Right now, it's Donald Trump.
Even as Trump was elected in November, we said we better get our fertilizer home because something might go silly. We've locked in interest rates for the next 4 years.
Agriculture and agri-food account for 7% of Canada's GDP. 1 in 9 jobs, about 2.3 million people. 60% of our agriculture exports go to the U.S. This economist wonders how much tolerance Americans may have for rising prices.
Those prices are going to go up.
For decades, the U.S. was one of the primary food suppliers for Europe, exporting wheat, soy, beef, and dairy products. But with Canada now stepping in with a more attractive deal, European buyers are turning away from U.S. farms. American farmers already struggling with inflation, supply chain issues, and labor shortages are now facing a catastrophic drop in demand from one of their biggest markets. The ripple effect will be felt across rural America, where entire communities rely on exports to survive. Then there's the automotive industry, another area where the U.S. once had dominance.
So Prime Minister Trudeau will really have to balance between the U.S. and China now, and of course there will be fears of retaliation from China as well.
And, Min, this isn't the first set of tariffs that will be imposed on the Chinese EV sector. We've had it from the U.S., as you just spoke about, from EU as well. What sort of an impact could these proposed Canadian tariffs also have on Chinese EVs?
So the short-term impact is not likely to be great because Canada is still a very nascent market for Chinese EVs. Tesla, though, is going to be disproportionately affected because last year, Canada saw this five-fold surge in Chinese EVs. Most of that is really driven by Chinese-made Teslas.
With Canada now securing exclusive trade agreements with the EU, automakers in Germany, France, and Italy are prioritizing Canadian suppliers for raw materials and components. This means U.S. auto manufacturers will have to pay higher costs for the same materials, making it harder for American-made cars to compete on the global market. And with Canada also becoming a key player in supplying batteries for electric vehicles, the U.S. is falling even further behind in the race for green technology. Meanwhile, in the energy sector, the shift is even more alarming. For years, Canada had been one of the biggest suppliers of crude oil to the U.S., helping keep prices stable and refineries running at full capacity.
Towards the EU. Now, the officials that I've spoken to since say that basically it wouldn't be completely impossible for Canada to decide to submit an application to be an EU member state. That while EU member states have to be, it says in the text, a European country, that there is actually no definition of what a European country is in that context, so therefore it wouldn't be completely impossible.
Now, with new EU contracts in place, Canada is sending more oil overseas instead of down south, forcing American refineries to look elsewhere for supply. The result? Higher gas prices, increased production costs, and a potential energy crisis that could drive inflation even higher.
Province. On the gear, they're going to enhance gear, get more border patrol, more sniffer dogs, if you want to call them that, patrol dogs. They're going to make sure they have more drones and more opportunities to cover the border. They have asked us, and I have agreed that we will support them, again, temporarily, as long as it takes to get through this. But again, we emphasize the border is not our responsibility. Well, I think he's being a little more aggressive than he was in the past. And I say this respectfully to the president. He's a different type of cat, to say the least. Maybe I'm a different type of cat, but...
Politically, the fallout is impossible to ignore. Trump's entire economic strategy was built on the idea that tariffs would force countries to play by America's rules, but in reality, it has done the opposite. Instead of bending to U.S. demands, Canada has found a way to sidestep American pressure completely. And this raises a much bigger question. If Canada can do it, who's next?
And Sean, I know we're taking a tongue-in-cheek look at Canada joining the EU, but Canadians, they must be reflecting on their place in the world given what has happened over the past couple of weeks.
Oh, yes, and reflecting very much upon the nature of our relationship with our largest trading partner. I mean, it's important to understand that Canada exports something north of 75% of our goods and services to our neighbor to the south. But the recent events with Mr. Trump musing about 51st state.
Other major trade partners are watching closely. Countries like Mexico, Japan, and even allies in South America are now considering whether it makes sense to reduce their reliance on the U.S. and look elsewhere for trade. If Canada's move becomes a blueprint for others, America could see a steady decline in global trade influence, weakening its ability to dictate the terms of international commerce.
Operation and taking the interests of allies seriously. Donald Trump has completely rejected that idea. He's never believed in it. He doesn't believe in collective security. He believes in domination and being dominated. And he wants the United States to dominate because that's the only relationship he can understand. If you're not dominating, you're being dominated. One of the reasons he identifies so much with America's dictatorial enemies is because they do politics in a way that he understands. Putin isn't the servant of the Russian people. He's the boss of the Russian people. And Donald Trump doesn't like being the servant of the American people. He wants to be the boss of the American people and through them of everybody else.
What sort of scenarios do you think Canadians should be bracing for?
Canadians should be braced for a lot of tariff aggression. Although a tariff is a tax,
For Trump, this is nothing short of an economic nightmare. The man who promised to bring back American dominance in trade is now facing a self-inflicted crisis, one that has made America less competitive, more isolated, and scrambling to repair damaged relationships. Reports suggest that his team is in full-blown panic mode, looking for ways to counteract Canada's new trade dominance. But at this point, is there anything they can do?
But rather when the spillover into the United States?
Well, I always like the saying that the future isn't predicted, it's invented. And I think that we could prevent it. We just have to get real serious real fast. I think we've been sort of dabbling on this issue. And I think to be a good neighbor, I think Canada has to really step up and get these things under control. And so this is, along the Canada-US border, this is very much a Canada issue to step up and be a good partner on. And so I think that at some point, I've been saying this same thing, by the way, for 15 years. And so
Washington is now left with two choices. It can continue down the path of trade wars and tariffs, doubling down on protectionist policies that have already backfired spectacularly. As this economic shift continues, one thing is clear. This isn't just about Canada and the U.S. This is about a changing world order in trade, one where America's dominance is no longer guaranteed. But how long will it take for Washington to wake up and realize what they've lost? Kindly share your thoughts and opinions in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos from us. Thanks for watching.